Hello viewers and welcome to another episode of Elections by Numbers. Today we're talking about the land of Lincoln, or the state of Illinois. Illinois is the state that contains the third most populous city in the whole country, that being Chicago, and the name Chicago actually comes from an old Algonquian word that means onion field. Despite having one of the largest metropolitan areas in the whole country, Illinois still is about 80% farmland. It was also the first state to ratify the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which abolished slavery in this country. And it is also the home state of a man named Robert Wadlow, or the Alton Giant. Wadlow was the tallest recorded man in history at about 8 foot 11 inches at the time of his death in about 1940, I believe. And at that time, he also wore a size 37 shoe, which I calculated how long that is in inches, and it's something like that. Anyway, getting right into the politics of Illinois. Illinois has 18 congressional House districts, and the current balance of power is 13 Democrats to 5 Republicans. And astoundingly, 12 of those 18 districts, so that's 2/3 of the districts, encompass either Chicago or some of its suburbs. Of those 18 districts, there are 4 that I would keep my eye on this November, those being the 6th, 13th, 14th, and 17th. I'm just going to list all 4 of those up in my window here. They are colored according to the party that currently is representing that district as of this video. And besides that is the partisan lean of the district when compared to the national average, according to the Cook Political Report's Partisan Voting Index. Now, of those 4, 2 of them just flipped in 2018, the 6th and the 14th, and both of those districts are suburbs, or they cover suburbs of Chicago. And as you'll see by the blue coloring, they both flipped from Republican to Democrat. So how have Illinois voters been trending in how they vote for House candidates? Well, let's take a look at a double line graph to figure that out. So looking at this, you'll notice right away the regular ups and downs that we can expect going from midterm years to presidential years and back and forth like that. Obviously, presidential years tend to have higher turnout numbers. But then, as we've seen so often already in this series, going from 2016 to 2018, we see a surge in Democratic turnout when compared to Republicans. The 2 midterm cycles prior to 2018 were 2014 and 2010, and as you can see, Democrats still outperformed the Republicans, but by just by a sliver. And then 2018, the difference there, I mean, I think it's even greater than 2012 when Barack Obama won his 2nd term and was probably able to turn out a ton of people from the state where he was formerly a senator. So that major leap forward for Democrats is probably highly responsible for the 2 seats that flipped in 2018. And as we noticed in other states across the country, it was largely in suburbs that people flipped from the right to the left. Okay, let's toss that aside, and I think I'm going to do this similarly to the way we did for New York a couple weeks ago, where Paulbot will help us with this. We'll take one district at a time, and he'll give us how we projected that each of these is going to vote in November. So, Paulbot, let's take this one at a time. Let's start with Illinois 6. We'll just do them in order. So Illinois 6 is currently controlled by a Democrat and has a partisan lean of +2 into the Republican column, and just flipped to the Democratic Party in 2018, remember. So Paulbot, how's that going to go? Okay, and we have a freshman Democratic representative maintaining their seat in Illinois 6 in a suburb of Chicago. Next, we have Illinois 13th, which is in a more rural part of the state, currently represented by a Republican with a partisan lean of +3 into the Republican column. And Paulbot, how does that go? Okay, and we have a flip. Another flip in favor of the Democrats, actually adding on to their gains from 2018. We are going to have incumbent Republican Representative Rodney Davis losing his seat to a Democratic challenger this November. The reason for this projection is largely due to that major increase in turnout for Democrats going from 2016 to 2018, the relatively centrist lean of the district according to Cook, and the fact that Davis only won re-election in 2018 by less than 1 percentage point. I believe this being a presidential year will be enough to put the Democratic challenger over the edge in Illinois 13th. So next we have Illinois 14th, currently controlled by a freshman Democratic representative with a lean of Republican +5. Paulbot, how does that go? Okay, and we have another hold in Democrats' favor, freshman representative in that district holding on for another 2 years. And lastly, we have Illinois 17th, another rural district. Paulbot, how's that going to go with a Democratic representative in a district that is Democratic leaning? Okay, and as expected, the 17th is going to stay Democrat. Okay, and that is all of the competitive districts that I consider to be in play in Illinois this November. And by my count, we have a net gain of +1 for Democrats, so let's make that official and put it on our first map. Mark it. Up next, we have a Senate election in the state of Illinois. Incumbent Democratic Senator and Minority Whip Dick Durbin is running for his 5th term in the state, and he is being challenged by a Republican named Mark Curran, who is a former sheriff in Lake County, Illinois. The most recent Republican senator that Illinois has seen was Mark Kirk, who was elected to finish out Barack Obama's term after he won his first presidential race. And then Kirk was elected to a full term in 2010, but was ousted in 2016 when he lost to Democratic challenger and current junior senator Tammy Duckworth. So how have voters from Illinois been voting for senators? Let's take a look at some voter turnout ratios to figure that out. So here we're looking at some values, some percent values that reflect how voters in the state of Illinois vote for senatorial candidates relative to House candidates of the same party. Generally, a value higher than 100% means that candidate got more enthusiasm, and a value less than 100% may have been for a candidate that was less inspiring. So going from 2010 to 2016, we see an upward trajectory really for Democrats and downward for Republicans, which, if we use this to extrapolate into 2020, would mean that Dick Durbin would inspire the average Democratic voter more than his Republican challenger would inspire a Republican voter in Illinois. So let's toss that aside. That works in favor for the incumbent Senator Dick Durbin. Lastly, we have to consider his approval rating in the state, and it is okay. He has an approval rating of net +1 in the state. Specifically, I think 38% of Illinois voters approve and 37% disapprove. What I think is odd about this particular candidate is that the total of those two values isn't closer to 100%. I mean, he's going for his 5th term, meaning he's been in the Senate for nearly 24 years at this point. So I feel like more voters would have gotten to know him at this point, but there it is. So in the end, we have a seasoned Democratic candidate running again. We have a +1 approval rating, which hardly means anything, but we have senatorial to House voter ratios that work pretty well in Democrats' favor. So let's turn to Pollbot to calculate how this is going to fare in November. Pollbot. And there's our result. Dick Durbin winning for a 5th time by a 22.78% margin of the vote. This is an improved performance on his last run 6 years ago in 2014, but it is much worse than how he performed in 2008. But of course, he was probably dragged across the finish line by Barack Obama at the top of the ticket that year. The reason this margin of victory is pretty large is not because of his approval rating. It's just because of the raw number of Democrats in the state of Illinois who are going to turn out for the Democratic candidate regardless of who it is. So let's make that official and put it on our senatorial map now. Mark it. Now it is time to talk about the presidential election of 2020, starring President Donald Trump and Democratic challenger Joe Biden. Illinois is a state that last voted for a Republican candidate for president in 1988 when they broke for George H.W. Bush over challenger Michael Dukakis, as did most states that year because they were riding high on the Reagan wave. More recently, though, we saw Illinois break for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump by about a 17% margin of the vote, which is a degraded performance from 2008, which is the first time they sent Barack Obama to the White House, where Obama won over Senator McCain by about a 25% margin of the vote. So if you're just looking at the difference from 2008 to 2016, it appears that Democrats' strength has waned in the state of Illinois, but of course we're looking at the last 10 years, 2010 to 2018, projecting into this year. Now, to understand how the Illinois voter votes for a president, let's pull up some more voter turnout ratios. Okay, looking at these, I did have to scratch my head a little bit to figure this one out. I mean, it seemed odd to me that the voter turnout ratio was lower for Barack Obama in 2012 than it was for Hillary Clinton in 2016. But part of the reason for that, I think, is because of the decreased turnout ratio that we see from Republicans in 2016 when you compare it to 2012. The raw House turnout numbers for Republicans in 2016 were much higher than they were in 2012. So Mitt Romney and Donald Trump in those two different election years both received a pretty comparable amount of votes, even though their voter turnout ratios were way off. Trump benefited from having a better raw House turnout from Republicans that year. So going into 2016, we may have seen voters from Illinois going for Republican House candidates while breaking to the left for Hillary Clinton for the presidency. That would explain the slight upward change for Democrats and the more significant downward change for Republicans. Looking at these, I would predict a pretty similar voter ratio for Democrats going into 2020, and maybe even possibly a slightly better voter ratio for Trump going into 2020 as well. Okay, now let's toss those aside and lastly consider the approval rating of the incumbent, President Trump. Illinois, while being dominated by the population in Chicago, has this president at minus 28 net approval. I mean, and I've even projected that more rural districts in the state are going to flip Democrat, so they're not exactly enthused for him down there either. So now let's take everything we know about the numbers here, give them to Pollbot to calculate how Joe Biden and Trump are going to fare this November in Illinois. Pollbot. Okay, and there we have our result. And it is no surprise Biden is going to carry the 20 Electoral College votes from the state of Illinois by about a 19.31% margin of the vote. This is a better margin than Clinton got 4 years ago, slightly better, but it is not nearly as good as the margin that Barack Obama enjoyed in 2008. So now let's make this official, 20 Electoral College votes for Joe Biden from Illinois. Put it on our presidential map. Mark it. So now all the results are in for the state of Illinois. We've seen a flip in Democrats' favor in the House. We've seen a Democratic senator hold on. We've seen a Democratic presidential candidate win the state again. Let's talk briefly about the future of the land of Lincoln by looking at an old line graph and two new ones. So let's look again at the raw House turnout graph that I was showing you earlier in the video. Let's look specifically actually at the slope values that you can see in both of those equations for those dotted lines. What that slope value represents is the increase in voters that turn out every 2 years, going from one election cycle to the next. So basically, every 2 years, on average, Democrats have received 174,900 more votes than they received 2 years prior, whereas Republicans have received 46,200 more votes than they had 2 years prior. Now, this is for House candidates, remember, but it's a pretty good picture of how the state is trending politically, I think, when we see a slope value that is much greater, about 4 times greater for Democrats than it is for Republicans. And it's largely due in part to that massive bump in their turnout going from 2016 to 2018 that Republicans just did not enjoy. Next, looking at these other two line graphs I've cooked up for you, these are estimates for the rate of increase or decrease in those voter turnout ratios that I was showing you earlier in those calculations. There's one for senatorial candidates and one for presidential candidates. Looking at senatorial, we see a positive slope for Democrats and a negative slope for Republicans, meaning that it is more likely that voters in the state will be more enthused to vote for Democratic candidates for the Senate in the future. And then looking at the presidential to House voter ratio numbers, we see a slope for Democrats that is basically zero. I mean, going from 2012 to 2016, what was the difference? It was like 107 to 109%, so it was barely noticeable. And then we even see a negative slope for Republicans, mainly because House turnout increased going from 2012 to 2016 for Republicans, but Donald Trump still received a pretty similar amount of votes that Mitt Romney did, so that accounts for his voter ratio value decreasing. Ultimately, I think this value degrading means that the voter ratio going into this November will be somewhere in between these two. Okay, let's toss that aside. I'll give you my final consensus on Illinois. Based on everything I've seen, everything I've found, it's getting more Democrat, yes. We saw 2 House seats flip as recently as 2018. I'm projecting another flip for Democrats this November. I'm expecting Biden to outperform Hillary Clinton in the state as well. And let's not forget how much the Democrats improved their turnout going from 2016 to 2018 versus Republicans who were right at the expected levels. Don't expect Illinois' influence as a foundational Democratic building block to go away. And that just about does it for our latest episode of Elections by Numbers. I want to thank you, the viewer, for tuning in today. If you like what you saw, please hit the subscribe button to get updates on new content as it becomes available. I upload videos every Monday and Thursday. I'm also on Twitter, and I update that account with which state I'm covering next ahead of the scheduled release date. So if you want to stay ahead of the curve, please give me a follow on Twitter, and that link is in the description. Thanks again for watching, and thank you for voting. See you next time.